Duke Alistair dismissed his wife from the fire brigade she had built and ordered its engines locked inside an abandoned coach house. Before the county magistrates, he accused Duchess Eleanor of inventing fire inspections to frighten tenants and waste estate money, then transferred her entire budget to a private company controlled by his political patron. Eleanor did not plead. She removed the brass fire whistle from her neck and informed Alistair that her father's insurance syndicate would no longer cover any Ashcombe property operating without her inspectors. By sunset, her trained firefighters had resigned with her. By morning, merchants refused to store goods in Alistair's warehouses, and the bank suspended the loan financing his parliamentary campaign. Then 3 tenant cottages burned in one night. At each ruin, Eleanor found the same strange detail. The doors had been coated with lamp oil from the inside. Someone was not merely exploiting Alistair's recklessness. Someone was guiding the flames toward Ashcombe Hall, where his victory ball would begin in 6 days. 11 years earlier, Eleanor had arrived at Ashcombe as a bride carrying 2 leather trunks, a marriage settlement worth £40,000, and a rolled map of every public well within 12 miles of the estate. Alistair had laughed when he first saw the map, not cruelly then. He had spread it across the library carpet, knelt beside her, and listened while she explained how the tightly packed cottages near the wool market could become a furnace if one roof caught fire. Her father's warehouses in London had survived 3 serious fires because the Harcourt family treated prevention as an investment rather than an expense. "You have been here 6 hours, Alistair had said, smiling, "and already you intend to reorganize my duchy. Only the parts likely to burn." He had kissed her ink-stained fingers. The memory returned as Eleanor stood among the remains of Miller's Row, staring at a child's iron cup, half buried in wet ash. Nothing remained of the first cottage except 2 blackened chimneys. The second had lost its roof, and the third leaned dangerously toward the lane. Rain from the brigade's hand pumps had turned the ground into gray mud, but the air still tasted of soot and scorched wool. No one had died. Eleanor's former men had ignored Alistair's dismissal and responded when the village bell rang. They had brought privately owned pumps and formed a bucket line from the mill pond. Without them, 12 adjoining cottages would have burned. Thomas Reed, her former captain, crouched beside the threshold. His broad hands were black to the wrists. "You were right, Your Grace." Eleanor knelt without concern for her dark green skirt. The oil stain followed the lower edge of the door, too deliberate to have come from a fallen lamp. She touched it with a gloved finger and smelled the residue, whale oil, refined and expensive. Poor tenants burned tallow. The estate used whale oil only in Ashcombe Hall, the assembly rooms, and certain warehouses belonging to Lord Vale's trading company. "Was the door locked?" she asked. "Bolted from the outside." Eleanor looked at him sharply. "You are certain?" Thomas lifted a warped iron bar from the debris. One end still carried the loop of a padlock. A woman sitting beneath a blanket nearby began to sob. Mrs. Mercer had lived in the cottage with her husband and 2 daughters. Eleanor crossed the lane and crouched before her. "Tell me what you heard." Mrs. Mercer clutched the blanket beneath her chin. "Hooves, perhaps an hour before the fire. A cart stopped behind the houses. I thought it was one of His Grace's deliveries." "Did you see the driver?" "No, but little Annie said the cart had a silver bird painted on its side." Lord Vale's crest was a silver falcon. Eleanor kept her expression still. A painted emblem could be copied. A witness frightened by fire could confuse one shape with another. She would not accuse a man on the word of a child, and she would not ignore it. A carriage approached from the eastern road. The Ashcombe crest gleamed upon its door. Alistair stepped down before the footman could fully lower the stair. He wore a charcoal coat, cut for London rather than burned villages. Lord Peregrine Vale emerged behind him, silver-haired and composed, with a jeweled pin shaped like a falcon at his throat. The tenants fell silent. Alistair's gaze found Eleanor beside Mrs. Mercer. For one fleeting second, relief crossed his face. It vanished when he noticed Thomas and the other dismissed firefighters standing behind her. "I gave orders that these men were not to act under the Ashcombe name," he said. "They did not," Eleanor replied. "They acted to save your tenants." Vale examined the ruins with the remote displeasure of a man inspecting damaged merchandise. "My company was never notified. The village bell rang for 13 minutes, Thomas said. Vale's eyes narrowed. "Are you suggesting my men ignored it?" "I am saying no one came." Alistair stepped between them. "Enough. Eleanor, you have no authority here." Mrs. Mercer flinched as if he had struck the words across her face. Eleanor rose slowly. "Authority did not extinguish these cottages. Trained men did, and now you intend to use this accident to justify your threats against me." "My threats?" She held his gaze. "You publicly accused me of theft without presenting a single account book. You surrendered the Brigade to a company that failed its first test. I merely declined to make my family financially responsible for your choice." Vale rested one hand upon Alistair's shoulder, an intimate gesture of ownership disguised as reassurance. "The county cannot permit a duchess's wounded pride to interfere with essential services," he said. "My men will investigate." "They will not touch the ruins until the magistrate arrives," Eleanor replied. Alistair's jaw tightened. "You cannot issue orders." "No, but the cottages stand on land secured by my marriage settlement. Until the tenants are rehoused and their losses assessed, my trustees have a legal interest in every object removed from this site." She had not known whether the argument would hold until Vale's expression changed, only slightly, but enough. He knew something about the land deeds. Eleanor turned to Thomas. "Place 2 men at each ruin. Record everyone who enters." Alistair caught her arm as she moved past him. His fingers closed above her elbow, not painfully, but with the old expectation that she would stop whenever he wished. "Call your father," he said under his breath. "Restore the insurance before the bank committee meets tomorrow, so that you may tell Parliament Ashcombe remains solvent, so that we may prevent unnecessary scandal." "You created the scandal in the magistrates' hall." His grip loosened. For an instant, the anger left his eyes. Beneath it, Eleanor saw exhaustion and fear. He had spent 2 years chasing a parliamentary seat, convinced that power in London would restore the influence his late father had squandered. Vale had offered introductions, votes, and credit. In return, Alistair had given him access to the estate, one office at a time. The Brigade had been the last institution Eleanor controlled independently. He had known what dismissing her would cost. He had chosen Vale anyway. "Cancel the ball," she said. Alistair's face hardened again. "Absolutely not." 3 fires began on the same night. The doors were secured from outside. Vale interrupted. "An extraordinary claim. What proof do you have?" Eleanor looked directly at the falcon pinned to his cravat. "Not enough yet." A young firefighter came running from the second cottage. He carried a scorched wooden box no larger than a prayer book. "We found this beneath the stairs." Thomas forced the warped lid open. Inside lay 6 small brass discs, each stamped with a number. Eleanor recognized them immediately. They were inspection markers from her brigade, fixed inside buildings after the pumps, wells, and escape routes had been approved. Vale smiled. Then perhaps the Duchess's own men were here before the fires. Eleanor ignored him. She lifted the first marker. Number 42 belonged to the North Granary. Number 19 belonged to the Dowager Cottages. Number 7 belonged to the Estate School. The final disc was polished rather than burned. It bore the number 1, Ashcombe Hall. On its reverse, someone had scratched a date into the brass, the night of Alistair's victory ball. Eleanor closed her fingers around the brass disc. The date scratched on its reverse could have been a threat, a warning, or an invitation to panic. Any of those possibilities served Lord Vale. "Who had access to these markers?" Alistair asked. "My inspectors, the station clerk, and anyone who entered the headquarters after you dismissed us." Vale gave a thin smile, a convenient number of suspects. Eleanor handed the disc to Thomas. "Wrap it separately. No one touches it without a witness." Alistair stepped closer. "If you spread word that Ashcombe Hall has been threatened, half my guests will remain in London. Then postpone the ball." "No." His answer came too quickly. Eleanor understood why when Vale spoke. "Several members of Parliament are attending," he said. "Cancelling now would confirm every rumor about Ashcombe's finances." Eleanor looked at her husband. "So your reputation matters more than 3 deliberate fires?" Alistair's face tightened. He did not deny it. A magistrate arrived shortly afterward and placed the ruins under Thomas's supervision. Vale objected, but Eleanor produced the settlement papers proving her trustee's interest in Miller's Row. It was only a temporary victory. Alistair still controlled Ashcombe Hall, its servants, and the preparations for the ball. By afternoon, Eleanor had established a temporary headquarters inside her father's unused wool warehouse near the river. The building was cold and nearly empty, but it had a stone floor, 2 working pumps, and enough space for the dismissed firefighters. Thomas spread Eleanor's inspection map across a packing table. The 6 stolen markers formed an uneven line across the estate: the school, the Dowager Cottages, the North Granary, 2 tenant rows, and Ashcombe Hall. "They are all close to the old underground water conduit," Eleanor said. The conduit had once carried water from the western reservoir to the mansion's ornamental fountains. Eleanor had proposed restoring it as an emergency supply, but Alistair had rejected the expense. Thomas traced the route with one finger. If someone opened the maintenance passages, he could move beneath 3 of these properties without being seen. And Vale's company received the estate maintenance contracts last month. Before Thomas could answer, hoofbeats stopped outside. Eleanor's elder brother, Charles Harcourt, entered carrying a leather dispatch case. He had their father's imposing height and none of his patience. "I came as soon as I heard," he said. "Father wants you in London. I am not leaving." "I told him you would say that." Charles placed several documents on the table. The first was confirmation that the Harcourt Syndicate had suspended Ashcombe's insurance. The second showed that Alistair's campaign bank had frozen further advances. The third was an invoice for 200 gallons of refined whale oil. Eleanor examined the signature at the bottom. "Alistair Ashcombe." "Delivered where?" she asked. "That is the curious part," Charles replied. "The invoice names Ashcombe Hall. The carrier's ledger says the cargo was unloaded at Vale's private depot." Thomas swore softly. The signature appeared genuine. If the oil was used to burn the estate, Alistair could be blamed for purchasing the means himself. Eleanor felt no impulse to protect him from the consequences of his arrogance. But hundreds of servants, tenants, and guests would stand between Vale and the Duke when the trap closed. "We need the depot ledger," she said. Charles shook his head. "Vale's men removed the books this morning. Then we find the carrier." A bell rang outside. Once, twice, then rapidly. Thomas ran to the warehouse door. Smoke was rising beyond the trees, not from another cottage, but from the abandoned coach house where Alistair had locked Eleanor's fire engines. They reached it in 7 minutes. Vale's new guards stood before the chained doors, shouting that no one could enter without written authority. Behind them, smoke curled through the roof tiles. Eleanor seized an iron bar from the wagon. "Break the chain." One guard moved into her path. His grace gave strict orders. A crash sounded inside as burning timber fell across one of the engines. Eleanor raised the iron bar and looked him directly in the eyes. "Then tell my husband his orders. Just destroyed property purchased with my money." Thomas and 4 firefighters struck the doors together. The chain snapped. Dense smoke rolled into the yard. Inside, the engines had been surrounded by oil-soaked straw, and nailed to the largest pump was a sheet of paper bearing Eleanor's signature, authorizing their destruction. Thomas tore the forged order from the pump before the flames reached it. Eleanor stopped him from folding it. "Hold it by the edges." The signature resembled hers, but the writer had copied the formal version she used on legal documents. Eleanor never used that signature on Brigade orders. Those carried only her initials and a numbered seal. The paper also smelled faintly of lavender wax. Vale used lavender wax on his private correspondence. Eleanor directed the men to drag the engines into the yard. One pump had lost its rear wheel, but the other 2 could be repaired. Thomas found a short fuse beneath the oil-soaked straw. The fire had been arranged to destroy the building after the forged document was discovered, leaving Eleanor apparently responsible for burning equipment Alistair had taken from her. A carriage swept into the yard. Alistair emerged, followed by Vale and a county constable. His gaze moved from the burning roof to Eleanor holding the forged order. Vale spoke first. "The constable must arrest whoever authorized this." "An excellent suggestion," Eleanor said. "He may begin by examining your sealing wax." Vale's composure faltered. She showed the constable the false signature, the fuse, and the lavender residue. Vale argued that wax proved nothing. Alistair remained silent until the constable asked who had controlled the coach-house keys. "Lord Vale's guards," Eleanor answered. "My guards received them from the Duke," Vale said smoothly. "Anyone could have stolen one." Alistair looked at Eleanor. "Did you order your men to enter this building?" "I ordered them to save my engines after your guards refused." "That is not what I asked." The familiar wound opened beneath her anger. Even now, with evidence of sabotage before him, he searched for a way to make her the offender. "No," she said, "I did not set this fire. I did not burn those cottages, and I did not forge that order." Vale leaned toward Alistair. "Her family's withdrawal has already endangered the estate. Perhaps she believes another disaster will force you to restore her authority." Alistair's expression changed, not into belief, but into willingness to doubt her. Eleanor understood then that this was how Vale controlled him. He did not need to prove she was guilty. He needed only to offer Alistair an explanation that preserved his pride. She removed her wedding ring. Alistair stared as she placed it on the scorched forge beside him. "You chose to accuse me publicly," she said. "You chose to give Vale my brigade after I warned you his men were untrained. And now you are choosing suspicion again because admitting you were wrong would cost you an election. Eleanor, I will protect the tenants. I will stop whoever is setting these fires. But I will no longer protect your reputation from the consequences of your own decisions." She turned to the constable. I request a formal examination of the coach house, the oil invoice, and Lord Vale's depot." Vale laughed. "You have no power to search private property." "Not yet." Charles stepped forward with another document. "But the Harcourt Syndicate insured the cargo stored there until yesterday. Under the policy, we retain the right to inspect any reported loss or suspicious transfer." For the first time, Vale looked afraid. He recovered quickly. "Then inspect it. You will find nothing." He returned to his carriage and departed before Alistair could stop him. Eleanor watched the wheels vanish down the road. Vale had wanted them to search the depot, or he would not have surrendered so easily. "Thomas," she said, "send no one there." Charles understood first. A diversion, or another fire. A boy came running across the yard, breathless and pale. He carried a message from Eleanor's temporary headquarters. Someone had broken into the warehouse while they were saving the engines. The inspection map had been stolen. Only one item had been left on the table, a ballroom invitation addressed to Duchess Eleanor Ashcombe. Across its face, in black ink, were 6 words, "Come alone, or the servants burn first." Eleanor examined the ballroom invitation beneath the warehouse lamps. The handwriting had been deliberately distorted, but the card itself came from the private batch printed for Alistair's most important guests. Only 3 people had received copies before the official invitations were posted: Alistair, his political secretary, Mr. Croft, and Lord Vale. The threat had not been left merely to frighten her. It had been left to draw her back to Ashcombe Hall. Eleanor folded the invitation and placed it inside Charles's dispatch case. "Vale wants me to enter alone," she said, "which means I shall arrive with witnesses." Before leaving the warehouse, she ordered Thomas to divide the firefighters into 3 teams. One would guard the rescued engines. Another would inspect the 6 properties identified by the stolen brass markers. The last would remain beyond the eastern wall of Ashcombe Hall, close enough to answer her whistle, but hidden from Vale's men. Charles sent copies of the oil invoice and forged destruction order to the Harcourt insurers. If Eleanor failed to return before nightfall, the documents would be delivered to the county magistrates. Only then did she go home. She arrived at Ashcombe Hall, accompanied by Magistrate Henshaw and 2 independent insurance assessors. Alistair met them on the front steps, his face tightening when he saw the official seals upon their cases. "You were instructed to come alone," he said quietly. Eleanor stopped. "So you knew about the invitation?" His confusion appeared genuine. "What invitation?" She showed him the threat. Alistair read it twice. When he looked up, the anger had left his face. "I did not send this. I know. You would have ordered me to come. You would not have needed to threaten the servants." Magistrate Henshaw stepped forward. 200 gallons of refined oil were purchased under your Grace's signature. Until their location is established, the insurers are entitled to examine every building named in the policy. "This is my house," Alistair replied, "and it contains several hundred servants and invited guests," Eleanor said. "If you obstruct a fire inspection after 3 deliberate burnings, the magistrate will record that decision beside your name." Alistair glanced toward the windows. Vale's silver falcon flew from a carriage waiting near the western wing. After a long silence, he moved aside. Inside, Eleanor found that Ashcombe Hall had been transformed since her dismissal. Crates of wine narrowed the servants' passage. Folding banquet tables blocked one of the rear exits. Vale's decorators had covered 2 fire doors with heavy velvet hangings, while dry branches and paper flowers had been woven around the ballroom chandeliers. Beneath them stood hundreds of candles ready to be lit. The new private brigade, had placed no water barrels inside the hall. Eleanor turned to the assessors. Record every obstruction. Alistair followed her into the ballroom. The decorators were told to make the room impressive. They were told to make it burn. That is an accusation. No, it is an inspection. She crossed to the western doors and pulled aside a curtain. The iron latch had been wired shut. Alistair stared at it. This time, he did not defend Vale. Eleanor ordered the servants to remove the hangings, clear the corridors, and carry the wine crates into the stone courtyard. The footman hesitated until Magistrate Henshaw repeated the order in his own name. Lord Vale entered before the first chandelier could be stripped. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded. Eleanor held up the wire cut from the fire door. "Perhaps your decorators can explain why the ballroom exits were being secured." Vale barely looked at it. "Crowds panic when too many doors are opened. My company was reducing confusion. By trapping them inside?" His expression hardened. "Your dismissed men have already burned ducal property. Now you invade your husband's home and destroy preparations for his most important evening. My men saved the engines your guards left inside a burning coach house." Vale turned to Alistair. "If you permit this humiliation, every political ally attending tomorrow will know who truly governs Ashcombe." The old appeal struck exactly where it was intended. Eleanor watched pride return to her husband's face. But Alistair looked again at the wired door. "Clear the exits," he said. Vale became very still. It was the first time Alistair had contradicted him in front of witnesses. The inspection continued into the servants' wing. Near the kitchen stairs, a young footman named Samuel drew Eleanor aside and slipped a folded maintenance sheet into her hand. "Lord Vale's men entered the lower passages yesterday," he whispered. "Mr. Pritchard objected. No one has seen him since." Mr. Pritchard was Alistair's steward. The sheet authorized work beneath the ballroom and bore Alistair's unmistakable signature. Eleanor confronted him in the library. "You opened the old conduit passages." Alistair studied the document. "Vale said they could carry water from the western reservoir for the ornamental fountains. The western reservoir has not supplied this house in 20 years. He assured me his engineers had examined it. You signed without seeing their plans?" "I signed dozens of orders that morning. That is not an answer." Alistair turned away, but Eleanor noticed his hand close around the back of a chair. Vale had not broken into Ashcombe Hall. Alistair had opened it for him, one careless signature at a time. "When did you last see Pritchard?" she asked. "Yesterday afternoon." "And who holds the passage keys?" "My secretary keeps the working copies. Vale's foreman received one set." "Mr. Croft?" Alistair nodded. The private invitations, the formal version of Eleanor's signature, and the keys to the underground passages had all passed through Croft's office. Either Vale had used him without his knowledge, or the conspiracy already stood inside Alistair's household. Eleanor took a lamp and descended with the magistrate, the assessors, and 2 trusted footmen. Alistair followed despite her refusal to wait for him. The cellar door showed no sign of force. Fresh mud marked the steps beyond it. Beneath the ballroom, the old conduit divided into 2 narrow stone passages. One ran toward the western reservoir. The other passed below the servants' wing and the record rooms containing Ashcombe's contracts, debt agreements, and land deeds. Eleanor lowered her lamp. Thin grooves had been cut into the floor. They were too shallow to carry water, yet deep enough to hold soaked rope or a line of oil. Black residue stained the stone. At the far wall, they found 6 empty casks, stamped with Vale's silver falcon. Alistair touched one of them, as if he still hoped it might disappear. "This is the oil I purchased. The oil you allowed Vale to purchase in your name," Eleanor corrected. A faint sound came from behind the next door. One of the footmen forced it open. Mr. Pritchard lay inside, bound at the wrists and bleeding from a wound above his temple. He was alive, but barely conscious. Eleanor knelt beside him. "Who brought the oil here?" Pritchard struggled to focus upon her face. "Vale's men," he whispered. "But they had Ashcombe keys. Where were they taking it?" His eyes moved toward the ceiling, the ballroom directly above them. "Not only there," he said. "The records wing. They mean to burn the contracts first." Alistair went pale. Eleanor understood the scheme at last. Vale did not need to murder every guest. He needed chaos, destroyed records, and an uninsured estate unable to meet its debts. Alistair had supplied the oil, opened the passages, and dismissed the only brigade capable of stopping the fire. When Ashcombe burned, every document would make the Duke appear responsible. Eleanor rose and faced her husband. "Cancel the ball," Alistair said. "No." He stared at her. "You demanded that I cancel it this morning. That was before I knew what Vale needed." She looked at the grooves beneath the ballroom and then at the empty casks. "If the ball is cancelled, he will remove the remaining evidence and choose another night. We shall let him believe his plan remains untouched." "What are you proposing?" Eleanor took the brass whistle from beneath her cloak. "We give Lord Vale an occupied ballroom, an unprotected records wing, and one final opportunity to light his fire." Her expression did not change. "But when he strikes the match, my brigade will already be waiting beneath his feet." Mr. Pritchard was moved to the village physician under Harcourt protection. Before leaving, he identified Croft as the man who had ordered the lower passages opened and supplied Vale's workers with Ashcombe keys. Eleanor did not arrest Croft immediately. If he believed the plan remained undiscovered, he could lead them to the remaining oil and the person assigned to start the fire. She established her command inside the old laundry building, where a service stair connected to the cellar. Thomas brought 6 firefighters through the eastern wall without Vale's guards seeing them. Charles sent Harcourt employees to watch every road between Ashcombe Hall, Vale's depot, and the western reservoir. Eleanor divided the operation into 3 tasks. Thomas would remove the oil stored beneath the ballroom and replace it with water darkened by soot. The visible casks would remain untouched. Wet rope would be laid inside the grooves so that any flame would die before reaching the ballroom. Charles would move the original estate contracts, land deeds, and debt records from the records wing. Empty boxes and worthless account books would be left in their places. Eleanor would allow the ball preparations to continue. "The servants cannot remain inside," Alistair said. "They will not," she replied. "Anyone not essential to the operation will be sent to the east cottages before sunset. And the guests? Their carriages will arrive, but they will be received at Harcourt Lodge. From the road, Vale will see lamps in the guest rooms and believe the house is occupied." Alistair looked toward the cellar passage. "What do you require from me? For once, you will sign nothing." She instructed him to tell Vale that the inspection had found only minor violations and that the ball would proceed. Alistair would also confirm that Eleanor had withdrawn to her father's warehouse after failing to persuade him to cancel the event. "You want him to believe I rejected your warning again. You have given him no reason to expect better." Alistair accepted the instruction without argument. By evening, the oil beneath the ballroom had been drained into sealed vessels. Each vessel was marked and witnessed by Magistrate Henshaw and the insurance assessors. One small section of the original oil-soaked rope remained inside a locked evidence box. The operation nearly failed when Croft entered the cellar without warning. Eleanor and Thomas watched from behind the old furnace wall as he inspected the casks. Croft lifted one lid and lowered a metal rod into the darkened water. When he withdrew it, soot coated the end. He did not touch the liquid or smell it. Satisfied, he replaced the lid and continued toward the records passage. Thomas reached for him, but Eleanor stopped him. Croft unlocked the records room entrance, checked the boxes, and placed a bundle of dry rope beneath a cabinet. He then returned upstairs. They followed after several minutes. "He is preparing a second ignition point," Thomas said, "and he possesses keys that only Alistair's household should have." Eleanor removed the rope, but left the cabinet undisturbed. She placed a small brass inspection marker beneath it. If Croft returned, the marker would reveal whether the cabinet had been moved. Charles arrived with information from Vale's depot. His men had intercepted a clerk carrying a payment list. The document named 3 members of Vale's private brigade and promised them £500 after the Ashcombe loss. Another entry recorded a payment of £2,000 to a recipient identified only by the initials E.C., Edwin Croft, Charles said. "It is evidence of payment, not proof of arson," Eleanor replied. "We still need him to act." Charles also produced a copy of Alistair's loan agreement with Vale. The Duke had borrowed £40,000 against Ashcombe's warehouses and Eastern Canal rights. If the estate failed to make its next payment, Vale's company could assume control of both. The payment was due 3 days after the ball. Eleanor placed the agreement before Alistair in the library. "Did you read the default clause?" Vale said it was standard security. "That is not what I asked." Alistair admitted that he had not asked his solicitor to examine the final document. Vale had insisted that the loan be completed before the political commission met. "If the hall burns," Eleanor said, "the warehouses lose their records and insurance. Your creditors demand payment, you default on Vale's loan, and he takes the canal rights." Alistair read the clause himself. "He meant to ruin me. You made that possible when you removed every person who questioned him. I believed the appointment would restore Ashcombe's influence. You were willing to destroy mine to obtain it." Alistair said nothing more. Eleanor did not yet tell him about Croft's payment. She needed to know whether the secretary acted for Vale alone or whether Alistair had authorized any part of the plan. At 10 o'clock, empty guest carriages began arriving at Ashcombe Hall. Servants placed lamps in the bedrooms, while figures wearing formal coats moved behind the curtains. From outside, the house appeared crowded. Vale arrived shortly afterward. Alistair received him in the entrance hall and repeated the words Eleanor had prepared. The ball would proceed, the inspection was finished, and his wife had withdrawn. Vale requested to inspect the ballroom. Alistair allowed it. Hidden below, Eleanor heard their footsteps cross the floor. Vale paused directly above the first oil groove, then continued toward the records wing. Minutes later, Croft entered the cellar carrying a lantern and a coil of dry fuse. One of Vale's guards followed him. Thomas and his firefighters waited in the connecting passage. Croft knelt beside the first groove and struck a match. The flame caught the end of the fuse, traveled several feet, and died against the wet rope. He tried again. Nothing happened. The guard moved toward the records wing to ignite the second fire. Before he reached the door, Thomas blocked the passage with 2 firefighters behind him. Croft dropped the lantern and ran upstairs. Eleanor blew one sharp note on her brass whistle. The doors above were locked by Harcourt guards. Magistrate Henshaw entered the ballroom with the insurance assessors, while Charles presented Vale's payment list and the recovered oil. Vale had expected to trap Eleanor inside a burning house. Instead, every exit now led to a witness. But Croft did not attempt to escape through the ballroom. He ran toward Alistair's private study, the room containing the original loan agreement and every document that could prove why Eleanor had been dismissed. Croft reached Alistair's study before the guards closed the corridor. He locked the door and overturned a lamp onto the document cabinet. Oil spread across the carpet and caught fire. By the time Thomas forced the door open, Croft had escaped through a service window carrying Alistair's private dispatch case. Eleanor ordered one team to extinguish the study while another searched the grounds. The fire was contained before it reached the adjoining rooms, but several campaign papers were destroyed. Vale remained in the ballroom under Magistrate Henshaw's supervision. He denied knowing Croft had entered the cellar. "The man served the Duke," Vale said. "If he attempted arson, you should ask whose orders he followed." Alistair told the magistrate that Croft had managed his political correspondence for 3 years and had access to his seals, invitations, and financial papers. Vale used the admission immediately. The oil was purchased under Alistair's signature. The passages were opened under his authority. His secretary attempted to burn his records. Every fact points toward the Duke. Alistair had created the evidence Vale now used against him. Charles arrived with a second document recovered from the clerk intercepted near Vale's depot. It was a private memorandum describing the intended consequences of the Ashcombe fire. Once the records wing and warehouses were destroyed, insurers would refuse payment because Eleanor's inspectors had been dismissed. Alistair would default on his £40,000 loan. Vale's company would then take control of the Eastern Canal rights and the warehouses required for the proposed trade route. The memorandum also directed Vale's agents to blame the fire on Eleanor's former brigade. The forged order from the coach house would be presented as proof that she had begun destroying Ashcombe property after losing her command. Magistrate Henshaw placed Vale under temporary detention while the documents were examined. Vale objected. "A memorandum found upon an unknown clerk proves nothing. Release me, or I will have every person in this house charged with unlawful confinement." "You will remain until Croft is found," Henshaw replied. A search of Vale's carriage produced no weapons or further papers. Eleanor expected that. Vale had kept enough distance from the operation to deny direct involvement. Croft still carried the evidence that could connect him to the plan. Thomas found Croft's tracks leading toward the western road. A horse was missing from the stable, and one of the gatekeepers admitted allowing him to leave after Croft displayed an order bearing Alistair's seal. "Where would he go?" Charles asked. "Vale's depot is already watched," Eleanor said. "He will not return there." Alistair examined the list of documents missing from his study. The dispatch case contained the original loan agreement, letters concerning the political commission, and the private account used to receive Vale's money. Eleanor stopped him. "What money?" Alistair said that Vale had advanced £25,000 toward the campaign for his appointment. The amount was separate from the loan secured against the canal rights. "What did he receive in return?" she asked. "The Brigade contract, access to the warehouses, and my support when the Canal Commission selected its private operator. You gave him control of the fire service, protecting the same warehouses he intended to acquire. I did not know he intended to burn them. But you knew his company failed my inspections." Alistair did not answer directly. He said Vale had promised to replace the equipment after receiving the contract. Eleanor asked the question again. "Did you believe his company was safe?" "No." The admission established that Alistair had accepted a known risk. It did not yet prove whether he had invented the accusation against Eleanor or allowed Vale to provide false evidence. That proof was probably inside the dispatch case Croft had stolen. Thomas entered with a report from the western gate. Croft had not taken the road toward Vale's estate. He had turned north toward the abandoned toll house beside the canal. The toll house stood above the main warehouse basin. From there, Croft could burn the missing documents and signal Vale's men stationed near the water. Eleanor ordered Charles to take the magistrate and approach by road. Thomas would lead the firefighters along the canal towpath. Alistair attempted to join them. "No," Eleanor said. "Vale wants every crime to end with your signature. You will remain here with him and give a complete statement of every contract you signed. Croft served me. I may know how to stop him. You knew enough to place him beside every seal and account you possessed. That is why you will be questioned, not trusted." Eleanor left with Thomas. Before they reached the canal, the brigade bell rang from the western warehouse. A second bell answered from the north granary. Croft was not attempting only to destroy the dispatch case. He had used Alistair's seal to send Vale's remaining men into 2 insured buildings, and both warehouses were filled with merchants' goods that Eleanor's family had withdrawn coverage from that morning. Eleanor sent Thomas to the western warehouse and ordered the second team to protect the north granary. She continued toward the toll house with 4 Harcourt guards. The alarm at the granary proved false. A Vale employee had rung the bell and fled, intending to divide the brigade. At the western warehouse, however, workers found burning rope beneath the loading platform. Thomas removed it before the stored goods caught fire. Croft had created the alarms to gain time. Eleanor reached the toll house as he was emptying the dispatch case onto a table. A small furnace had been lit, but none of the documents had yet been destroyed. 2 of Vale's men guarded the entrance. The Harcourt guards approached from the road, while Eleanor entered through the canal office below. Croft attempted to escape by boat, but Thomas's second team had already secured the landing stage. He returned inside and held Alistair's seal over the furnace. "Allow me to leave, or every order bearing this seal becomes your husband's word against mine," he said. "The seal proves only that Alistair trusted the wrong man," Eleanor replied. "The documents prove what you did with that trust." Croft threw the seal into the furnace. Eleanor overturned a bucket of sand onto the coals before it was damaged. The guards arrested Croft and his 2 accomplices. Inside the dispatch case, Charles found the original loan agreement, letters from Vale, and Croft's payment account. One letter instructed Croft to steal Eleanor's inspection markers and place them at selected fire sites. Another ordered him to copy her signature onto the coach house document. The payment account matched the initials on the depot list. The most important document was a private agreement signed by Alistair and Vale 6 months earlier. Alistair had accepted £25,000 in exchange for transferring the brigade contract, granting Vale access to the warehouses, and supporting his company before the Canal Commission. A handwritten addition stated that Eleanor had refused to certify Vale's equipment and must be removed before the agreement became public. Croft had added a note beneath it. "The Duke will accuse the Duchess of missing funds. No audit will be requested until after the appointment." The line did not prove Alistair had written the plan, but it showed the accusation had been prepared before any money was reported missing. Eleanor returned to Ashcombe Hall with Croft and the recovered documents. Magistrate Henshaw questioned him in Vale's presence. Croft initially denied everything. Charles then presented the letters, payment account, stolen seal, and testimony from the 2 arrested guards. One guard admitted that Croft had ordered the cottage doors chained and supplied the oil used at Miller's Row. Croft changed his account. He claimed Vale had designed the fires, but that Alistair had knowingly approved the campaign against Eleanor. Vale rejected the accusation. "Croft is attempting to save himself," he said. "The Duke signed the contracts. The Duke purchased the oil. The Duke dismissed his wife. And you paid the men who set the fires," Eleanor replied. The magistrate ordered Vale and Croft held separately. The recovered papers were sealed for a public inquiry. Alistair was waiting in the library. Eleanor placed the private agreement and Croft's note before him. "Did you know Vale planned to accuse me before you dismissed me?" "No." "Did you know there had been no theft?" Alistair said the Brigade accounts had shown a temporary shortfall. Vale claimed Eleanor had moved the money into Harcourt-controlled accounts. Alistair had accepted the claim without requesting an independent audit. Eleanor produced the original Brigade ledger recovered from the warehouse. The supposed shortfall was payment for 2 new pumps. Alistair's steward had approved the purchase, and Alistair himself had signed the delivery receipt. "You knew where the money went," she said. Alistair acknowledged signing the receipt, but claimed he had forgotten it when Vale raised the accusation. Eleanor did not accept the explanation. "You dismissed me before examining a single ledger. You repeated Vale's accusation before the magistrates. You refused an audit because an audit would have delayed your appointment." Alistair admitted that he had chosen not to investigate. That distinction mattered legally, but not to Eleanor. Whether he had invented the accusation or deliberately refused to disprove it, he had used a lie because the truth obstructed his ambition. The inquiry was scheduled for the following morning. Representatives from the insurers, the Canal Commission, the merchants, and the 6 villages would attend. Before Eleanor left the library, Alistair asked whether she intended to expose the private agreement. "I intend to expose everything. If the commission sees it, I will lose the appointment. You lost it when you sold public safety for Vale's money." Eleanor took the original agreement with her. At the inquiry, Vale would answer for the fires. Croft would answer for the forgeries. But Eleanor would not permit Alistair to present himself as their innocent victim. He had placed the weapon in their hands. The next morning, she intended to make him admit why. The public inquiry opened in the County Assembly Hall, where Alistair had accused Eleanor of theft. Eleanor presented the evidence: oil from Vale's depot, stolen inspection markers, the forged coach house order, Croft's payments, and the memorandum explaining how the Ashcombe fire would force Alistair to default on his loan. Thomas testified that Vale's company had ignored the village alarm. Mr. Pritchard confirmed that Croft gave Vale's men access to the passages beneath Ashcombe Hall. Croft admitted forging Eleanor's signature and arranging the fires under Vale's direction. He then produced a letter he had kept as protection. Written 5 days before Eleanor's dismissal, it informed Alistair that no Brigade money was missing. The supposed shortfall had paid for 2 engines already delivered. Alistair had written beneath it, "Proceed with the accusation." The contract must be transferred before the commission meets. Magistrate Henshaw compared the handwriting with Alistair's other documents. It was genuine. "Did you believe your wife had stolen any money?" he asked. "No," Alistair answered. "Why did you accuse her?" "Because she refused to approve Vale's company." Eleanor questioned him next. "You knew his equipment had failed inspection?" "Yes." "You knew his men could not protect the estate?" "Yes." "And you dismissed my trained brigade because Vale's money could secure your appointment?" Alistair attempted to explain that the equipment would have been replaced later. "That was not the question," Eleanor said. "Yes," he admitted. Vale had organized the fires, and Croft had forged the documents, but Alistair had knowingly removed the only person capable of stopping them. The Canal Commission immediately withdrew Alistair's proposed appointment and suspended Vale's company from every public contract. Vale was detained for conspiracy, arson, fraud, bribery, and attempted murder. Croft and his accomplices remained in custody for forgery and their roles in the attacks. The inquiry found that Alistair had accepted secret political money, made a knowingly false accusation, and transferred an essential service despite documented safety failures. His accusation against Eleanor was removed from the county record. Alistair stood to apologize, but Eleanor stopped him. "You will not ask for forgiveness in the same room where you destroyed my name. You will answer first to the families whose safety you sold." Charles then presented the financial consequences. The damaged cottages, engines, cancelled contracts, and outstanding loans exceeded Alistair's available income. Because Eleanor's settlement had funded the Brigade and secured several Ashcombe properties, her trustees could petition to remove them from his control. Eleanor ordered the Harcourt Bank to recall every loan secured against Alistair's personal property. She also instructed her solicitors to begin proceedings for legal separation. By evening, Alistair had lost Vale's money, his political appointment, his credit, and control of the institutions Eleanor's fortune had built. The lie he used to remove his wife had given her everything she needed to remove him. Within 3 days, the consequences reached every part of Ashcombe. The Harcourt Bank recalled the loans secured against Alistair's London residence, hunting estate, racehorses, and personal investments. Other creditors followed. Without Eleanor's family guaranteeing the estate, Alistair could not refinance the debt. Vale's loan remained valid, but the court suspended his company's right to seize Ashcombe property while the fraud charges were investigated. The canal warehouses were placed under independent trustees, and Alistair lost the authority to sell, mortgage, or transfer them. Eleanor's marriage settlement protected the land and buildings purchased with Harcourt money. Her trustees removed the fire engines, village wells, and several insured warehouses from Alistair's control. The 6 villages were given protected leases that could not be pledged as security for his personal debts. Alistair signed the settlement because refusing it would have forced the entire estate into bankruptcy. His London house, horses, and hunting land were sold. The proceeds repaid the bank, rebuilt the burned cottages, repaired the damaged engines, and compensated merchants whose goods had been endangered. Ashcombe Hall remained his residence, but its accounts were supervised by trustees. Half his personal income was assigned to debt repayment. He also resigned from every political committee connected to the canal project. Vale's property was frozen pending trial. His company lost its contracts, and the private brigade was dissolved. Its usable pumps and horses were transferred to the villages as partial compensation. Eleanor used the recovered funds to establish the Ashcombe County Fire Service as an independent institution. It would no longer belong to the Duke or depend upon his political decisions. Trustees representing the insurers, merchants, villages, and firefighters would oversee its budget. Thomas Reed became chief captain. Each village selected volunteers to receive training, while Eleanor retained authority over inspections, equipment, and emergency planning. Her name was publicly cleared, but she demanded more than a corrected record. Alistair returned to the county assembly hall and withdrew every accusation he had made against her. "My wife stole nothing," he declared. "I knew the brigade accounts were honest. I accused her because she would not approve an unsafe company, and because I valued Lord Vale's money more than her judgment. He also acknowledged that the brigade had saved the cottages, warehouses, servants, and Ashcombe Hall after he had ordered it dismantled. Eleanor listened without relieving him of responsibility. Afterward, Alistair asked for a private meeting. He told her that he would accept the legal separation and would not contest her right to an independent residence or income. He offered to cooperate with the trustees and testify against Vale. "That is what you owe the people you endangered," Eleanor said. "It is not a gift to me. I know an apology cannot restore what I destroyed. No, nor can public shame make the betrayal accidental." Alistair asked whether years of honest work might allow them to reconsider the separation. Eleanor refused to promise him a future. "You did not betray me because Vale deceived you. You read the truth and ordered the lie to proceed. Whatever man you become afterward does not change the choice you made when my name stood between you and power." The separation agreement was completed the following week. Eleanor received an independent residence on Harcourt land, full control of her settlement, and permanent authority within the new fire service. Alistair retained his title and Ashcombe Hall, but little else. He had lost his political appointment, personal fortune, financial independence, and the wife whose reputation he had sacrificed to obtain them. Months earlier, he had expected Eleanor's dismissal to prove that Ashcombe belonged to him. Now every institution that kept Ashcombe alive operated beyond his control. Vale was convicted of conspiracy, arson, fraud, bribery, and attempted murder. Croft and the hired men received separate sentences for forgery and their roles in the fires. Vale's seized property-funded compensation for the affected tenants and merchants. Within 6 months, the independent Ashcombe County Fire Service opened 6 village stations. Each received a pump, trained volunteers, an alarm bell, and access to a protected water supply. No duke, creditor, or political patron could transfer its property without trustee approval. Eleanor directed inspections and training, but refused to make the service dependent upon her alone. Every account was published, every contract required independent review, and every village held a seat on the governing board. Alistair complied with the financial settlement. He testified against Vale, cooperated with the trustees, and used part of his remaining income to repair the reservoir and tenant houses. Eleanor acknowledged the work without treating it as repayment for what he had done to her. Before the separation became final, Alistair returned the wedding ring she had left on the scorched forge. "I understand that regret does not restore trust," he said. "No," Eleanor replied. "It may change what you do next." "It cannot change what you chose when my name stood between you and power." He asked for nothing further. At the opening of the central fire station, the old-school bell was recast with metal recovered from the damaged engine. Eleanor's original map of wells, pumps, and protected buildings was engraved beside the entrance. Thomas stood as chief captain. The firefighters who had resigned with Eleanor formed the first permanent crews, joined by volunteers from the 6 villages. A young female apprentice waited beside the restored engine. Eleanor placed the brass fire whistle around her neck. 11 years earlier, Alistair had treated Eleanor's map as an amusement. Later, he had tried to take away the institution she built from it. Now the map belonged to the county, the brigade belonged to the people it protected, and Eleanor's authority no longer depended upon her husband's permission. She gave the apprentice the signal. The new bell rang for the first time. It did not announce another fire. It announced that the woman Alistair had dismissed had built something he could never control again.